And then I'll pause after asking the question and then pick it up afterwards. Um, the usual community refuge thing, I'd like to start with a question as just a way of getting everybody's voice in the room. And then we'll practice a bit, and then we'll take refuge, and then we can have a discussion. Right? So here's the question I thought of, and um, tonight I want to talk about taking refuge and the last 2 weeks that we've lived through, right? Um, but the question that I thought might warm that discussion up is uh, I want to ask about something in the middle. So there's lots of examples of things in the middle, and I want to ask you for an example. Uh, Buddhism is often referred to as the middle way, and it's helpful to have some middle examples. So, hi Sarah, we're just starting. So the question is something in the middle. And I'm going to give my example and then I'll hit pause on the recording and I'd be happy to hear yours. So, I loved when I was a child seesaws. And there is a point in the middle of the seesaw where it balances on. So that I think that's called the fulcrum, but whatever. That point in the middle of the seesaw. That's an example of something in the middle. These get recorded and shared, at least parts of it, with people who aren't here. There's a larger community than the 8 or 9 of us you see online, but as far as I know, this is your first time here, so welcome. Um, what we normally do is we have an opening question. That's just a way of getting everybody's voice in the room. Tonight's opening question had to do with an example of something in the middle, because we're going to talk about Buddhism as the middle way. At least that's what I would like to start the discussion with. And then we'll see where the discussion goes. It's sort of an open format. You can talk about whatever. And usually somewhere before we get to an hour and a half or an hour and 3/4, so that would be 8:30 my time. Um, you have to, it's now 7:10, 7:20 here. So somewhere in the next hour, we'll have reached an end and we'll say goodnight. So that's what we do. Um, I was inspired, to offer a few reflections because it's quite. I mean, it's obviously been a very turbulent last 2 weeks or a week and a half for many of us, and especially with the election in the U.S. Uh, a lot of strong feelings and strong opinions on both sides. Um, what's interesting, I was listening today to an analysis, and it was closer than one might think. There were roughly 49.5% for Mr. Trump and 48 or something percent for Vice President Harris. So that was close. That's a couple million votes, but that's close. In an electorate of 170 million, 2 million is a close margin. Um, so that's the first thing to say, that you listen to commentaries and it seems cataclysmic and exaggerated. And as a practitioner of the Dharma, I'd like to, myself sort of bring it more to like what actually happened, what's the reality, and what am I working with right now? So we start when we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, in the example of the Buddha, as this is an example of a human being who achieved full awakening, and in the teachings and in the companionship of, fellow meditators and practitioners who are interested in that. And then we offer the 5 promises. That's our our daily discipline. I should have said, I usually say after that that those are in force until you wake up tomorrow. Those are a daily commitment. You can take them for life, but here in Community Refuge, we take them till the next day. And because it's nighttime, for many of us, it's a short duration, but there you go. There's the aspiration. And Buddhism is often talked about. So I want to talk about the Dharma and our reaction or my reaction to events and how I really felt the pull to go catastrophic, like this is the worst thing ever. Um, you know, there's a slight majority of people who think it's the best thing ever. Let's just let that sink in. That it's sort of some people feel like they won, and others of us feel like we lost, and it's a disaster. But maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Um, and part of the Dharma teaching about the middle way and about engaging with reality has to do with, if I can, a very short Buddhist description of reality. Um, Here it goes. I think it's in 3 steps. You experience awareness. And that's if you don't think you're experiencing awareness, there's nothing the Dharma can speak to, right? So you experience awareness. It is often a rough ride. It's bumpy and uncomfortable, and then sometimes it's really delightful and pleasant. Right? So you experience awareness. It's a rough ride. You are in a flow of experience, as we say often in Community Refuge, more like a river flowing by than a rock. Right? So that's the second one. You experience awareness, right? The rough ride of awareness. It's like a flow, right? And you experience that flow inside of a web of connections, of all kinds of things connected one thing to another. We're speaking across the medium of the internet. We're using computers or cell phones or some kind of technology. You think of all the parts, everything that got put together to make your computer or your display screen work, plus, your family history leading up to you being here and everything that brought you here and all of your thoughts and everything that happened today, the clothes you're wearing, somebody made them, somebody grew the material or produced the material. The whole world is in the interconnections of the experience right now as it flows by. There's not one unitary, so singular, permanent anything that wasn't caused by something else, didn't have a beginning, won't have an end, right? It's everything is this temporary flow. It's why a river is a good example, right? You can experience the river going by, but the water that's here, that's now here, that's now here, that's now downriver, it's not the river you're looking at, right? It's always changing, very dynamic, not a rock. It's not a solid thing. So you have awareness, and it's a rough ride. Um, Everything's connected, and it's a flow. That's largely the Dharma. We could put philosophical and fancy names on that. Your awareness not being a thing. You don't have an ego. Ego itself is a story we're telling ourselves, and the fact that everything is interconnected is sometimes called the dependent arising of things. Uh, that it's nothing's permanent or solid or singular. That's often known as under the name emptiness, right? It doesn't have to be super complex. Inside of this flowing, interconnected reality that we're aware of, right? The teachings of the Buddha were there is a spot in the middle of the experience, or in the middle of phenomena, or in the middle, it's called the middle way, where if you hold your awareness open, you know that things are coming and then they flow through and then they go. You're not denying that the river's flowing, that things have changed. You're not saying, I always like the river. Sometimes the river is too turbulent. Sometimes the river is too slow. Sometimes the river could dry up, right? Um, you might not like it when it dries up, right? So you don't have to like it. It doesn't always have to be perfect, but this river of experience is constantly going by. And so for me, when I thought about the election and all of my feelings that went with it, it's like, this is temporary. Everything's temporary. No thing, no experience, with the possible exception of awareness, but that gets us into a very deep discussion. No, and awareness is not a thing, right? No thing lasts forever. And so you think of the good times, like maybe you really liked what was happening in the last 4 years, and you liked the promises that one candidate made, and you thought that would be wonderful. Everything will be perfect. It'll be like, we're headed towards a golden age. And then the golden age ends, surprisingly, shockingly, disturbingly. And you go, oh my, right? And then you're in this other age that you might call an age of darkness, an age of pain, and you think it'll never end. And then, happily, it's over. You could hear this contemplation of everything being impermanent and subject to change and think, there's a couple of ways to misunderstand this. So I want to point at the right understanding before I point at the misunderstanding. I think when the Buddha taught dependent arising, the lack of a permanent self, and the experience of awareness, what was being pointed at was that, okay, in the midst of life's flow, we have the opportunity to show up with the best that we have and be helpful, be useful, be kind, or at a minimum, not to be a nuisance to others. So that's what he taught. The misunderstanding of their flow is, well, if it's always changing, I can't do anything. Well, that's not true. Even in the worst of times, you could show up and be kind. And that kindness, it might not change the external situation. It might not feel like it changes anything, but you brought kindness into a difficult time, or generosity, or patience. Everybody else around you is losing their composure, and you can hold your sense of like, well, this is difficult, yes. And no need to freak out. Freaking out doesn't help. Catastrophizing, making it the absolute worst thing ever. So that's one misunderstanding, that you can't do anything. The other misunderstanding is nothing is worth doing. Even if I can do stuff, what does it matter? It's always changing. Well, I don't know about you, but I find that kindness changes things for the better. Speaking the truth changes things for the better. Learning how to listen to other people more deeply or more openly changes things for the better. And so when other people are lying or prevaricating or fake newsing, it helps to be able to listen and to ask yourself some intelligent questions and to go, what would help this conversation? I usually find that arguing with people isn't that helpful. or telling them here are the right facts doesn't change their mind. But maybe asking them a question or inviting them to think more deeply or asking, why is that important? Right? That I found those useful. So there's a sweet spot in the middle between what in the Dharma is called eternalism, the idea that there could be a perfect state, and if we work hard enough, we'll get there, and things will just stay golden, right? The eternal perfect state. You might call that heaven. You might call that nirvana. You might even call that Buddha, right? Like we can get to Buddha. There is no Buddha to get to, right? From the Dharma point of view, there is the experience of awake, which you might call Buddha, but that's more like a river than a rock. There's no Buddha rock, right? Um, that's essentially the meaning of the old Zen proverb: if you meet the Buddha, kill him, because that's not the Buddha. That's a dream, right? So that's one mistake, and that's everything's so important and this is so catastrophic and we've got to fix it, right? And the other mistake is sometimes called nihilism or nihilism, from the Latin word for nothing, nihil, nothingism, nothing matters. Everything's changing. What can I do? I'm just going to go to the woods and eat cookies, right? And pretend that nothing happened, right? Well, that's ignoring that we are part of this flow of interconnected everything. And when we show up, we have a chance to make it better. So, taking refuge in the Buddha, as an example of somebody who did what I'm talking about, worked with his awareness, worked with understanding, and achieved awakening, and then shared that. He could have just stayed in the woods and enjoyed his enlightenment and not taught. There are supposedly beings that have awakened in other eons in religious myths, Buddhas that never taught, but our Buddha taught. Um, or he could have, rushed around trying to like fix everything, and that doesn't work. So there is a sweet spot of like holding your heart open, holding your mind open, trying to follow the teachings as the best that you or I can understand. And then that's the refuge. That's where we find our confidence in the flow, in the middle, rather than in one extreme or another. So, those are the thoughts I had to offer tonight on taking refuge in turbulent times. And I'd be really interested in what you all would like to share. So, I'm going to unpin the video.